money side of things, and then get on to another one, which is the policies around our data in particular. So this is increasingly an area of extreme interest. Unfortunately, that extreme interest is coming at a legislative level. It is something that is increasingly pertinent because of the digital age that we live in. But having a policy to manage the data that we're collecting and using for monitoring and evaluation is really important. Certainly in terms of safety and security, so managing access to data, in particular for organizations that work with children, that holds healthcare data, the safety and security around the management of that data is really important. And that speaks to both things like access management, so who can get that data, and also protecting it from external third parties, so internal parties, how they access and manage that data, and then also external parties, and this is where the security comes in. We also have to look at how we're managing things like redundancy or backup. So how's the data being secured to prevent any external parties from getting in? How do we manage access internally? And then how do we protect that data and ensure that it doesn't disappear because of a hard drive failure or lost spreadsheets or a paper box that disappears. So those policies around safety and security speak to access management, data protection, security, to give comfort both to those clients and beneficiaries that we serve, but also to our other stakeholders that their data is not going to go astray and not going to be used for nefarious purposes, but also it's not going to be lost so that we're then unable to report on our results because we had a system breach or somebody nefarious got into the system and deleted something, or we had a staff member that was fired and decided to wreak havoc on the system. So the policies will allow us to define how we mitigate for those risks. And then our new favorite topic, which is POPIA compliance. This is linked to GDPR. So for those colleagues that are based in other countries, GDPR is a flow down off of a European standard for the management of data. There is some overlap into the safety and security function, but generally this is increasingly well defined. And what we're finding, this is where the regulators are starting to clamp down. I think that the sector is probably less at risk or less of a target to the regulator for now. But I think that's only because the regulator is more likely to be able to recover fines from commercial entities than it can from civil society. So the POPIA considerations, or GDPR, is looking at how we're managing the individual data that we're capturing and ensuring that we're not breaching the rights of those individuals whose data we have. And ideally, we want to start this process at the outset. So even when we're looking at the planning stage, so POPIA process talks about data protection by design and by default. So ensuring that at every point of every touch point in terms of data, we have the best interests of the owner of that data at heart, and ensuring that we're firstly not collecting data that we don't need, but also that we are protecting and managing the data responsibly that we do have, and certainly that we're not exploiting that data or allowing it to be exploited by anybody else. So that POPIA function really speaks to a few key categories of data. So firstly, the personal information, and then special personal information. So just some credit to my friends at DSD. So this was some information that was shared at a recent session with their team around how they're navigating POPIA within the DSD structures. So firstly, identifying things like personal and special information. As you'll see, the personal information, we are collecting many of those pieces just generally. So you'll see that there's a lot of common data there that you would see at any registration, certainly in terms of any attendance function. The rules ramp up a bit when it comes to the special personal information. And there is a lot more sensitivity around issues like biometric information, certainly religious beliefs and sexual orientation, although that's part of the personal information. And the reason for this is because of the exploitability of those kinds of data and the potential implications of that data sitting in the wrong hands. So when we're thinking about protecting data, these kinds of data points that we're talking about here are the ones that we really need to manage and protect as carefully as we possibly can. Just to note that our friends at the South African regulator have recently implemented a fairly significant fine on the Department of Justice, within which the regulator actually sits, for breaches of the Protection of Personal Information Act. So in essence, they're prosecuting or they're fining their mother department for breaches in how they're managing individual data. So the regulator is starting to flex their collective muscle. They do also have the ability to enforce those fines. So we're certainly going to see a lot more fining coming out of the regulator, as I said, in particular for corporate or commercial entities where they're a lot more likely to recover that value. But it doesn't mean that as civil society we're exempt. On that point of exemption, there are certain exemptions that you can apply for, but generally that relates to how the information is managed and stored. But if we look at things like the steps in considering that POPIA compliance, this is a standard process that would be followed around interrogating what your compliance would look like. A key element within that, of course, is always consent. So consent, and especially where you're working with special kinds of information, it's important that the consent is informed and that you have clear evidence of that informed consent rather than just a signature. You'll see a function of consent within every single piece of technology that you ever see, increasingly so now. It's that thing that you check on after ignoring all of the terms and conditions. I think that there is a lot of value in this drive towards the protection of personal information, because we're often not aware of the risk that we are subject to, and increasingly in this age of big data. So a good example is, for example, the Zoom conditions that were recently updated. And they're likely to see a significant drop off in their user base because they weren't able to sneak their updated terms and conditions in. Somebody picked up on the fact that what you're agreeing to is that they can use the data that is recorded in any one of their sessions for whatever they want. Now, for the most part, they're using it to train their artificial intelligence, so they can run things like transcription, they can run things like thematic analysis off of conversations in Zoom. But unfortunately, the risk is that if you consent to that detail, you're allowing them to do whatever they want with your recording or with your meeting. So any data then becomes available to them and they can use it for whatever they want. So those terms and conditions are really important to firstly interrogate as you're signing your life away. To all intents and purposes, if I asked around the room who had read any of those conditions when you provide consent to any of those apps that you've downloaded onto your phone, I think there will be very few people that have actually even looked at those terms and conditions of use that relate to the consent that you're providing. So things like sneaking in the ability to use your data for whatever they want, a lot of them are there. I mean, for all we know, we're giving away the the rights to our firstborn when we accept the download of the next I don't know, candy popping game that we see on our mobile application. So these terms and conditions are really important, certainly as we're applying them into the program function and ensuring that the consent is informed and understood. As civil society organizations, we often work with fairly sensitive data, so it's important that we have these mechanisms in place to allow us to use the data to firstly deliver the programs, but also to improve the programs that we're working on, and also to be able to report on the work that we're doing. So the POPIA process, although it is a cumbersome one and sometimes a slightly scary one, is an important one to consider. And it is a gradual process. We'll look to run some sessions specifically on POPIA with some specialists that work on POPIA compliance, because it is an entire field in and of itself. Ourselves, we were fortunate or unfortunate enough to have run the gauntlet with our friends at PwC, having done an audit of the organization and some of the systems that we're doing. It is a fairly onerous undertaking, but what it did highlight is certainly the levels of risk that we're exposing our partners and our beneficiaries and clients potentially to if we're not managing the data effectively. So as I said, this we'll share the slide deck as well, so you've got this as a reference point, but certainly it is something that we could spend at least 3 hours talking about as we're digging into POPIA and GDPR. I just want to pause there before we move on to the tools and technology to see if there are any questions around POPIA. I can answer some of them, but I'm certainly not an expert in POPIA compliance. No. Okay, great. I made it all up anyway. Okay, so then potentially onto one of my favorite points of discussion is tools and technology. As I said, over the past 15 years or so, we've seen a gradual migration into using of technology for monitoring in particular, and increasingly into visualization and analysis. It has been a slow and long road. And again, primarily because we don't know what it costs to do traditional manual monitoring and evaluation. So when presented with an alternative that has a very clear and specific price tag, the answer is usually no. Fortunately, with the free tools that have become more prolific, that has changed somewhat. There is always a trade-off in terms of using free tools versus paid for tools, and generally that's in things like usability and functionality. But there are a lot of different tools that are free or low cost that can help you to better do your monitoring and evaluation. And that's about things like data collection, but also about your document management. Google Drive is a good example of how a lot of documents are shared. But there is a lot of capability around that document management that's not being fully used, which we also need to consider, as certainly as it gets to things like POPIA. Similarly, when it comes to data management, so once we've got that data, where are we storing that? What sort of function are we using? Are we running Excel? Do we have a database? Then looking at visualizing it, how do we take that data and make it into an understandable picture that is consumable for our different stakeholders, and then can also feed into the reporting. An important consideration as well is around infrastructure. So that technology infrastructure, as we've seen the growth in cloud infrastructure and everything happening online, it is a consideration for us as well. And in particular, the capacity building. I'm going to dust off the soapbox and jump on that one again. We did a piece of research a couple of years ago, looking at the digital divide within civil society. And certainly we'll speak to this a lot in the next session in September. But although the technology is an important part, and we see a lot of barriers to firstly understanding what technologies are available, being able to access those technologies, by far one of the biggest barriers is the adoption and use of that technology. So we talk about the warmware layer. Unless you have the warmware layer, the technology is largely useless. So there are no silver bullets when it comes to technology if you don't have the capacity to operate and manage and use that technology. So important to consider the training around the technology as you're implementing those different tools. There are some really exciting things like AI and chatbots and drones and blockchain. AI in particular has ramped up over the course of the past 8 months with the release of the Chat GPT and the Google instances and the Apple instances of AI. And that's going to add a lot of value. We're seeing within some of the communities of practice, a lot of AI work being done around thematic analysis on qualitative data so that we can quantify that data on a dynamic basis using artificial intelligence and natural language processing. Similarly, in using things like chatbots to engage better with participants on the ground and also even to collect data. Drones and the Internet of Things, or IoT, increasingly being used, and particularly for things like agriculture. Lots of technology to assist and support both the delivery but also the tracking of progress through technology. And then blockchain, really looking at different ways of managing and storing data in a more secure way, and also in a way that is non-centralized. So being able to decentralize and secure data is really what blockchain is all about. And those are the kind of that cluster of four at the bottom is the 4IR that everyone is talking about. But we need to, I think, focus first on getting the basics in place before we think about AI and chatbots and drones and blockchain. That technology will start to mature. What we're likely to see is it becoming more invisible. So we won't know that there's an AI function that sits on some of the tools that we're using. It'll just make things easier for us to analyze or to collect or to manage. But these are some of the things that we're seeing increasingly across the monitoring and evaluation function. So on our side, we've looked at a range of different tools. So some that we've built ourselves, some that we've used with partners, some that we've seen over the course of time. And as I said, we'll dig into those in the next session in September. But there are a lot of existing tools that can support the work that you're doing around data collection, analysis, and data management. So there's a whole suite of Google functionality that's free or at a very low cost, in particular for NGOs. Microsoft, of course, has a suite of offering for not-for-profit organizations that includes the full Microsoft suite and things like Microsoft Forms that will assist with the monitoring function. And then there's, of course, the Kobo suite, which is primarily for monitoring and collecting data in field, and that has been around for some time and is quite mature. Can be somewhat difficult to navigate, especially if you have no previous experience in working with these different technologies. So again, coming back to the capacity building, don't expect these tools, these technologies to be a silver bullet. They can certainly improve and help with the monitoring and the analysis that's required for your results-based management, but they're not a silver bullet. You need to have the resourcing internally to be able to manage those tools and to apply them to the program and the processes that you're running. And of course, there are a range of different complications that come from using those tools and other considerations like devices, like the cost of data, like the capacity and the digital literacy of the users of that technology. And also just a caution when it comes to building technology. Certainly as builders of technology, we've built a lot of different systems. We now no longer build individual systems for individual organizations because of the rinse and repeat and the duplication and replication of technologies. We find that there's a lot of waste of resource in building out specific tools for specific organizations that could be used by multiple organizations. So we try to build off of multi-tenancy so that those tools can be shared. So before embarking on any build process using technology for your M&E or even for programs, important to look around and see what's already available. A lot of these systems that are available have been around for quite some time, and they'll do the job that you need done without having to spend on a bespoke system. There may be some trade-off in terms of what you want the system specifically to be or to do, but if you have limited resources, there's a fairly good chance that there is an existing system that you could be using to improve your monitoring and evaluation or even your program delivery without having to build something new. So I implore you, try not to reinvent the wheel. Certainly if you have the resources, we want to spend those resources rather on implementation rather than building something that already exists. I will move on to some of the systems just to give you a view of what those might look like. We'll also touch on the statistics and some of the other data sets that are available that are potentially not known about that can support the monitoring and evaluation function for organizations across the continent. Now, I'm going to pause quickly there to see if there are any specific questions around the tools and technology. Most of them I'll defer to the session in September, but if anybody had any questions around the tools and the tech, now's a good time to jump in. Sorry, you had a question? Yeah, if you want to raise your hand and just jump in, I'll try and toggle between the chat. And Nadine, yeah, the easiest way is our old friend Google. So definitely to go to Google as a first port of call to see what is available. Yeah, to basically do a search. If you look at data collection, data analysis, a good way to check is just to go to Google and see what is available off of a generic search that you put into Google. Also to look at some of the communities of practice around monitoring and evaluation organizations. Some of the funding partners also have a good view of what tools are available. I know that the UNICEF team does have an entire range of platforms. Yes, I see Betty asking what is SAMEA. So SAMEA is the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association, and that is really a collection or a body around community of practice and M&E in South Africa. So there are practitioners primarily, but also they include a number of different other stakeholders, like UNICEF is fairly active within SAMEA. The Department of Monitoring and Evaluation also works with SAMEA, but really they're a community of practice, and their role is as a secretariat in coordinating engagement around monitoring and evaluation, and hopefully building some capacity around monitoring and evaluation. They do have some resources available, but yeah, Google's a good go-to in looking at different tool sets. Okay, so moving on to leveraging your monitoring and evaluation. So as we've discussed earlier on, the monitoring and evaluation function is definitely to drive your operational visibility, and that means informing the way that you're delivering the programs on the ground, the activities that you're implementing, the tasks that are being undertaken by the team members, and any, of course, peripheral information around the implementation linked to that community or program that's being delivered. The strategic visibility, this to give us insights around how well we're doing, what are the results that we're achieving, to then inform the reports and allow us to learn from the data that we're collecting. And you'll see, again, the results-based management approach, being able to collect the data that will inform the delivery, allow us to make strategic decisions around the results that we're achieving, and then learning from those. What we also want to add on to is marketing for investment. So marketing for investment is very much about packaging your value proposition as an organization in order to attract investment. Monitoring and evaluation is the foundation for that investment proposition. And I think this is also why it's so important to have a conversation with the organization, or your organization members, around the value and importance of monitoring and evaluation. Because the monitoring and evaluation, the stories, the data that you have to show the value that you're delivering should really underpin how you're going to market to attract investment, to attract funding. The monitoring and evaluation function also is how you're able to show a return on investment. And that a return on investment is articulated through your indicators, through your outputs and through your outcomes, in showing how much you can deliver for the value that you receive from an investor. So it's really important for the monitoring and evaluation to underpin the packaging for the marketing of the organization. As you're presenting the value that you can deliver, it has to refer back to the indicators, the data that you've collected, the results that you're able to show. So it is a really essential part of the sustainability of the organization. So we know that most civil society organizations are dependent on funders to sustain their implementations, to sustain their infrastructure. If you don't have a value proposition that articulates the work that you do in the best possible way, you're not going to be as likely to attract that investment. And remember, of course, we work within a very competitive environment. I think that the NGO sector is probably one of the most competitive, given the limited resources that are available to civil society organizations. So each organization is having to compete with every other organization. Within South Africa, that's the sources of funding are relatively limited. Certainly, the same would apply across Africa and if not the world, whether it be from corporate funding, philanthropic sources, or global agencies. There's a limited pool of funding available. And if you're going to be able to compete effectively, you have to articulate your value proposition. And that value proposition is underpinned by your monitoring and evaluation, the way that you're able to articulate and show the results that you can achieve. And ideally also how you're able to show your ability to manage the process and also innovate and adapt and evolve the process to get the maximum value for the investment that you receive. Linked to that, just is the building of reputation. So building the visibility of the organization is slightly different from the marketing function. So that's being able to advocate for change also requires data. Being able to promote the organization and the reputation of the organization is based on the reliability of the data that you're collecting. To have robust structures and processes and policies in place is going to give comfort to all stakeholders that you're engaging with. If you can show a solid process for implementation, managing your processes and managing your implementation, you're a lot more likely to receive funding to be able to attract the sort of investment that you need. So monitoring and evaluation and indeed the broader results-based management approach is an excellent way of showing that you have the capacity, that you have the ability to report on results reliably, to strengthen your reputation within a really competitive environment. And then, of course, another soapbox for me, which is sharing the work that we do. I say soapbox because it's a consistent source of frustration. I'm working with so many organizations, but not necessarily being an implementing partner ourselves. We see a lot of work that is happening within different sectors, within different segments of the social economy. And one of the things that continues to frustrate me and is a consistent barrier to broader progress around impact objectives is the lack of collaboration. Organizations across civil society are exceptionally good at talking about collaboration and talking about sharing learnings and talking about sharing their results. They're exceptionally bad at actually doing it. And to some extent, that is because of the competitive nature of the environment in which we work. But it is also a factor of there not being robust structures in place when it comes to sharing those insights. So monitoring and evaluation, and certainly the results-based management approach, underpins a reliable base of data that we can share with other stakeholders, with other organizations within the sector, that would allow them to learn from our mistakes, which we don't like to talk about at all, to improve the potential outcomes that we need to see across the board. So that function of sharing is a really important one. And if you're wanting to be able to do that in the best possible way, you need to have the data to back up your claims. You need to have the data to show where there's an opportunity for improvement. But I think more importantly, there needs to be some real intent around actually engaging in collaboration and active sharing. The establishment of various forums is great, but I think ultimately as organizations and implementing partners, the responsibility really rests with you guys in actively pursuing that collaboration. Also finding out what else is available, who else is doing things, do they have data, asking the questions around the data, and actively pursuing that function of collaboration and integration. Integration being an important one as we start to look at the broader use of digital tools. If we're using digital tools, there's an opportunity to integrate the work that we're doing easier, to share data more easily, and also to better manage things like referral and linkage between different organizations. And again, all of these functions come back to a robust monitoring and evaluation process, a solid practice of results-based management, and a culture of data-led decision-making within the organization. So on that note, we're approaching the end of the session. We've managed to get through quite a bit faster than we normally do. It's because I've been making everything up and nobody's had any questions, so I've been able to invent things as I've gone along. So I wanted to spend a bit of time and just open the floor for some broader discussions, some questions, some comments, and any specific things that you wanted to address through the session. We'll also link you into some of the resources that we're curating with the UNICEF team on their partner portal. So the floor is yours. For anyone that has any questions or comments, I see we still have 164 participants. So I'm surprised that there's such silence. It should be a really noisy room. Thanks to the TLF team. Nice to see you on here. It's been some time since we were last with you for the evaluation. No questions. Maybe I can pose some questions then to our colleagues that are out of South Africa, if they had any particular questions that related to working in other countries in Africa. As I said, we have worked across the continent in many different countries, so happy to answer any questions there. Gabriel, you had something.
Yes, Jason, it's not a question, but it's more of a sharing of information. In terms of safeguarding the information of the patient, more especially the confidential information. With us, what we're doing after the information has been collected from the sites, we have a storeroom where we package all the information, actually all the paper forms within the storerooms. And that storeroom, it's a lockable storeroom. And the storeroom is dedicated for one person and one person only who's got access to go to that storeroom. And within that storeroom, that's where we normally put our backups in terms of using the USBs, but we normally back up on cloud to make it a point that all our paperwork and all the patients or participant information or beneficiary information is as safe as possible. That's how we do it. And whenever one of the management or anyone or visitor want to go to the storeroom to retrieve some information, there is a register that you mark or you fill just to show that who have entered the storeroom on such a date, so that whenever there's something missing or wrong, we're able to track back to the register that who have been at the storeroom at that time or at that point. So with us, all the beneficiaries or the patient files are safe with us. I just wanted to share that.
Great. Yeah, I think that's very useful, and thanks for sharing that, Gabriel. I think some time ago we were involved with the National Electronic Health Record Project for South Africa, and we were looking at digital records, as the name implies. And interestingly, some of the most difficult discussions were with doctors around safety and security, and the management of the data on the system. That was up until we did a field visit to a number of district hospitals where the teams, and there were about 25 of us within that one team, were able to walk into district hospitals to go in and pick up patient files and to leave the hospital without any issue. So often the security around physical documentation is not as robust as what you've described. But certainly as you start to digitize, there are both risks and benefits in terms of securing that data. But also as you're looking at the policies around safety and security and managing personal information, is to look at all potential risks that might exist when it comes to backup redundancy, but also access. But thanks for sharing. That's great. I know you had a question as well. I see your hand.
Thanks, Jason. So my question is twofold. Firstly, to appreciate all the information that you have shared. And I think for me, what was striking was the last part, actually, on leveraging M&E, because I feel like based on the information that you're sharing, most of our international or even the national organizations focus more on donor-led reporting. So we do not pay much attention around how we can leverage M&E for business development. So I was wondering if there is, if you have any additional information or resource links that you can point us to that could also even help people within business development units within our organizations in terms of how we can collaboratively work together to leverage M&E for business development, because I think we could better market our organizations if we work together, not as siloed units. And from the onset, actually, I think it would be great for us even to input it in our theory of change as an organization, to show the links, the direct links between M&E and business development. So yeah, I just wanted to ask if there are any resource links where you can point us to that could help around leveraging M&E for partnership development and for marketing, for investment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I appreciate that. So yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I think the starting point is really to understand that, as we were saying, we're in a competitive environment, and we're competing for limited funding. So if we're wanting to compete aggressively, we have to tell a better story than the organization next door that's doing the same thing that we are. And certainly within the age of social media, That's a very active channel for promoting the organization, for building reputation, but also for attracting interest and investment, or finding other partners to collaborate with. So certainly, really two things: infographics as a quick and an easy way of articulating the value that you're delivering, that combines data in a visual and accessible way. And there are lots of different platforms out there. Canva is a good example of one, where you can fairly quickly set up an infographic and then post that into your social media channels. And then the second point is around storytelling. This is a fairly recent learning for me. I'm not a particularly good storyteller. I like to speak about especially things like technology, but I'm not very good at telling a story. And stories are really important for getting buy-in, for getting understanding, for getting somebody to put themselves into another person's shoes. So the storytelling part is really, really important. Being able to tell a story within a first-person context, to have somebody tell their own story. Yes, using a traditional written story is great, but increasingly things like audio and video, everyone consumes media in that way now. We're all quite lazy because we only like to read in 120 characters or less. So video and audio is a lot more accessible. So in packaging your story, look at those mechanisms for distribution around social media in particular, and looking at using those formats for those stories around particular video and audio, which makes them more consumable. But that would be my recommendation in taking your data and creating bite-sized chunks, understanding how people consume data and information at the moment, and then using those channels to promote the work that your organization is doing. Of course, you have to have the data to back up the stories, to back up the infographics, to back up the snippets of information that you're distributing, to attract investment and to build the profile and reputation of the organization. Does that help, I hope, Anna?
Yes, it does. Thanks so much, Jason.
Right. No other questions? Oh, there we go. Thanks, Lorraine. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jason. Good afternoon, everybody. I think mine is not really a question, but it's just a comment, and a comment as well to you for a beautiful presentation. And I just want to highlight the issue pertaining the costing, especially on the NGOs. I often find that proper costing on the project is not done, which then brings the element of you feel like the project is taking too much of your time, and you find that as you highlighted, your time is not actually budgeted for. All the costs actually are not actually taken into consideration, and that's how the organization feel at the end of the day. Then you find that M&E becomes a luxurious event to undertake because of those issues. So my advice is that proper costing needs to actually be done, because there are people, tools, and all these things that you have actually highlighted to ensure that we plan properly, so that when you undertake this process, because indeed, as you said, once you plan properly on the M&E, it is actually a way of improving the reputation, as well as ensuring that you get more money out of this. Also, when you go to approach other organizations, it also says you've got all the systems in place to ensure that you can actually get more money out of not money, but the budget that you actually require to undertake other projects as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lorraine. Yeah, the budgeting is a really important one. Again, it's sometimes makes a big difference in moving it from a grudge activity to something that can really add a lot of value to the organization. That's thanks, Lorraine. And Nadine?
Yeah, just a quick one.
and it follows on the costing issue. Is it valid to make an argument that because M&E is worked into the performance goals of staff members, that the M&E then is costed into people's salaries, because that's often what's used as an explanation? It seems fair, but it ends up being, if I can use this term, a hidden cost, and is often then under or devalued as a consequence. And then just in closing, I really just want to applaud you for an amazing session. You did not make things up along the way. Certainly comes with a load of experience, knowledge and skills, expertise, which I think all of us benefited from. So thanks, Amal.
Thanks, Nadine. Really appreciate that. Yeah, the costing component and carrying that within existing roles and functions is all very good and well. But I think it is about being able to have that conversation when you're defining those budgets and being able to justify it, knowing what the other associated costs are. Yes, it may be part of somebody's role to participate or to support a monitoring and evaluation function, but there are always additional costs associated with that M&E function. And again, it's the time spent on monitoring. If there isn't enough allocation of resourcing, it means that it's time away from the program implementation. So that's always the argument to have is, yes, we can do the monitoring and evaluation and absorb the cost through the existing costing on the staffing side, but it does mean that it's going to take away from the actual implementation or the programming. But it is always a process of ongoing negotiation, at least to be able to have the conversation. And ideally, you want to be able to have that conversation from an informed perspective, so you know what those costs are. Because if a funder says, well, what are the costs, and you can't answer, then you don't really have an argument for justifying them within the budget. So again, information is power, so you need to have that information on hand. Sindisa?
For me, I think all of the two speakers, in fact, they are talking, or their discussions are pointing to the same issue, that of risk management. I mean, if I were to say, throughout my years, I've realized that when you talk of risk management, it's always focused on your finance, your procurement, but M&E doesn't get to be re-stratified. As a result, you only realize the financial leakages at the point where you're already incurring the cost. So I think maybe we need to overhaul how we look at M&E, and maybe start thinking of putting it as a risk-based M&E, so that we put it forward that you cannot leave risk management and risk stratification for M&E behind. And if that is done, then we would be able to prevent such financial leakages. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. So yeah, so certainly that risk management, it ideally is something that we want to bring into the theory of change, and identifying and articulating those risks so that we can manage them effectively. And again, also to be able to have those conversations both internally and externally about the potential risks, and also mitigations or considerations when it comes to delivering those results. But yeah, thanks very much. Angie, on your question, recruiting an M&E specialist, they are unfortunately relatively few and far between. M&E specialists within organizations, there's in the past hasn't been much in the way of formal training. SAMIA is driving that, and certainly UNICEF is supporting that through the emerging evaluators process. And we're also looking at how we can drive the development of a bigger pool of monitoring and evaluation specialists within organizations through structures like internships, where there is some subsidized placement or some subsidization for those roles within organizations. But it is a consistent issue, and one that's going to take a bit of time to build out a pool of resources that can fulfill that function. But also monitoring the evaluation, as we know, has been always a grudge activity, one that's not eagerly undertaken. It takes a special kind of person. I think also it is about articulating the role. And we had a recent discussion around packaging, monitoring, and evaluation as a form of data science, which is very sexy for everyone at the moment, especially within a corporate environment. But if you package monitoring and evaluation within a data science function, what it does do is it opens up additional career paths for individuals that are seeing a lot of talk around data science. So monitoring and evaluation, which we've been doing for years and years and years, is only something now that's extending into the commercial, the corporate sector, as they start to look at bigger sets of data, not just the bottom line financial data. So I think in packaging it around data science and analytics is going to make it more appealing to younger people coming into that area, and also looking to draw from those data analyst graduates to be M&E people. And then just on your question, Megan, around connectivity, we'll touch on this when it comes to the technology presentation. It is a consistent barrier. We are seeing it diminish somewhat. There's more and more coverage, and especially if our friend Mr. Musk gets his satellite network up, it's going to change things quite dramatically. But we are seeing increased access to the internet. The cost is still a factor. We try to navigate around that with applications that allow synchronization. So for offline data collection, so you can collect in field offline and then synchronize. So a number of different applications that allow for that. There are also things like learning hubs or Wi-Fi hubs. So we've used one that has that's a learning hub that incorporates learner management and about 500 gigs of learning data, and it operates entirely offline. So you can connect to this device using a Wi-Fi signal without it being connected to the internet, and then access about 500 gigabytes of data, of different learning content, of videos, of education materials. It's pretty astounding, the sort of stuff that's available. But again, I think there's the first go-to is looking at what is available, what does Google say? So searching for those things before kind of trying to build or develop something new. There's a lot of information already out there that is accessible. So my recommendation is always go to Google, go to Bard on Google as well. Use those AI functions to ask questions, and try to keep innovating and use your data to drive that learning and evolution, both in terms of monitoring and evaluation, but also in terms of your program delivery as well. So then, just lastly, just in terms of the resources, we'll share this so that anybody that has already left the session can also see that. So we have curated some resources with the UNICEF team. So we're going to be constantly building on to the library that is available. This is both in terms of tools and templates. We'll also start to include links to other resources and other tools. As I mentioned, there are a lot of other tools available. So we've got some. Let me just switch to this view here so you can see some of those. So there's a few different data sets within the Stats SA fold. So Stats SA has a huge amount of data that can help you with your baseline data. So this one is easy enough to register. You just register as guest, and then you can log in to access those data sets. Similarly, in terms of this NestStar data set, again, these are national databases. If you start to talk about impact level indicators, so there is a lot of data available that often we just don't know about because the guys at Stats are not particularly good at promoting the work that they do. But there are a lot of different data sets available. We've also then got some tooling. So with UNICEF and PwC, we built out a youth engagement platform for youth organizations. So this is a suite of tools for organizations working with youth that allows you to manage a bunch of different functions. So in terms of micro-learning, event management, moderated chat functions, digital tasks, data collection, there are a bunch of tools available through the platform to be able to use to support your programs. So there are a bunch of tools that are available for free or at no cost or low cost that can support both your program implementation and also your monitoring and evaluation function, in particular when it comes to big data sets that are already available. And yeah, just in closing, so we do have that session in September. I'll also be running that session. We'll deal with some of the tech stuff, which is always quite interesting and exciting. We're going to look at some of the core functions of data collection and management, both from an M&E point of view, but also looking at where there might be opportunities to innovate around program delivery, given all of the technology that is available. We're also going to talk a bit about the digital divide and how that manifests at an organizational level. Our research has shown very, very clearly how civil society organizations experience that digital divide at an organizational level. So not being able to access technology, not being able to use the technology, and not being able to manage the technology. So we're going to dig into a lot of that detail in the next session. But thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Ilona for your support in managing the chat and all of your inputs there. And yeah, we look forward to everyone on seeing everyone in September. Falani, you had a question before we close up. Was that a hand from TLF, or was it just a no? Okay, great. Well, I'll pass across to you, Ilona, for some closing remarks.
Just very briefly, just to thank you, Jason. I think it's amazing that, you know, we had a core group of over 175 people for the majority of the time. So that's a testament to the value of the session. And you can see that everyone's popping up with their thank you, and a big virtual applause for Jason and for the background team that also supported pulling everything together. So we look forward to having a conversation again and the training in September. We will share, everybody has asked for the presentation and for the recording, and we will definitely share that following the session. So thanks again. We'll see you all in September. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. All the best.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, bye.
We are muted. Thank you. Goodbye.